Hi, and welcome to this quick tool review. This time around we have another product from VEVOR that we're going to take a look at. It's similar to one I've reviewed from a different manufacturer in the past. It is a pipeline camera, or a sewer camera as the other one's called. And this one is from VEVOR. The other one was from a different manufacturer. This one is 100 feet approximately. It's just under, it's 98.4 feet. Not quite sure how they arrived at that. This one comes on a reel, which is a nice touch. The other one came in a, how do you describe it? Just rolled up in a package with Velcro. This is a nice way to store the fiberglass feeding tube, or the plastic feeding tube that is stiff enough to let you push it down a pipe. That's a handy feature. Also, I suppose if you were putting this in someplace really dirty, you probably wouldn't want to put it inside the nylon packaging. The other one, this one, lets you keep it out in the open where it can dry off, and you could probably hose this off. Feels like it's some sort of plastic, maybe even fiberglass reinforced. This is very similar design to some fish tapes I've used, some very large fish tapes I've used. So it's a good design to copy. Looks like connector-wise they're using BNC. Nope, no it's not, it's DIN. Okay. I don't know if this connector is particularly waterproof. I don't think it is at all. So this end of it probably shouldn't get wet. That's probably not the greatest idea. They probably should have used some water resistant or waterproof connector on this side. That would make sense since this thing is supposed to be used in wet environments. This side of it is IP68 rated, good down to 65 feet approximately, about 65 feet underwater, which is interesting because there's 100 feet, just under 100 feet of feed line here. So it means if you put it all the way in something straight down, you are setting yourself up for the possibility of having a leak in the camera side, which would be catastrophic. The end of this guy is about 0.78 inches. It's got some interesting plastic sliders along the side here to keep it centered. This is pretty rigid when you push. This is kind of odd if you ask me, this design. This is the lens right here, so if you're pushing forward, the lens is going to contact other things first. They must have some sort of protectors you put over it. Looks like they have storage for the camera portion of this underneath, which is kind of nice, and a nice cover protect it while you're storing it. Oh, okay, fold up, even nicer. I like that. This is lithium ion. They come with a micro secure digital card to record stills and or video. That's another nice touch. And it charges with the micro USB connector. We're going to pop this guy on a charger real quick, let it charge up, and we'll come back and test some more. Unlike the other unit that only comes with a cable, that they expect you to have a 5-volt charger somewhere, which is not unreasonable. This guy comes with a 5-volt 2-amp charger so that you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. And you just plug it in. I was never a big fan of these micro USB connectors. The USB-C is a lot sturdier. These guys have a habit of deforming and not working great, so I've never been a huge fan of them. Oh, there is an indicator that it is charging there. So we'll let this guy charge up and see where we end up. I like how they made the design so all these parts fit together. This holds the camera in place, but it is very light gauge plastic. So if you make the mistake and leave this out and bang this against something, you're going to break this almost certainly. So don't do that because it's not meant for abuse. I like the fact that you can store everything in place. They do have some strain relief for the cable coming off here, which is also pretty light gauge. It looks like what they did is they found some sort of plastic material, and it's hollow, and they ran the wire down the center of that tube, which I don't have a problem with. It's telling you need to fully insert this plug into the jack, which makes sense because this is what's also known really commonly as an 1/8-inch jack, except it's not the standard stereo jack, which would just have 2 rings and 1 sleeve. A tip, a ring, and a sleeve rather. This one has 2 rings, You see this a lot for video cameras where they want to do left and right audio and video all in the same connector. So ground, video, audio left, audio right sort of thing. This one, so for this guy, they ran the wire that runs down the center of this plastic tube. I don't know if it's fiberglass or not, but it's some rigid plastic, which will make it easy to push. If this isn't rigid enough, you'll have a hard time getting it through the pipe where there's any obstructions at all. So that's nice. They ran the wire down the center tube here into the center of this where it doesn't have to rotate, and then brought it out this side and out here. Taking a closer look at the slip ring assembly here. See how they did it. It's 3 machine screws. And a plastic lid. This guy is asymmetrical, so it will only go on one way. 2 are closer to each other than they are to the other one. There's no gaskets on here, so this is not watertight. And if you look in here, there's some sort of pre-made slip ring assembly, but that also does not look particularly watertight. Where the wires enter, there's no obvious sealing there, so that's a little disconcerting. No place for an O-ring in here to keep water out. So my recommendation is keep this away from water. Definitely do not hose down the whole unit. If you're putting this someplace, if you're running this camera down someplace like a sewer and you have to clean it, definitely do not definitely do not hose this whole unit off. I think you'll end up with problems in the near term or long term. As is common with this sort of fish tape design, they have a stop built into it. Some of these will have friction added because you'll need that, because once this starts to extend, it'll pay itself out very rapidly because it's untensioning the material. In my case, of the fish tapes, they're fiberglass, and there's a lot of tension to keep it inside this material. And once you start to pay it out, it wants to straighten out really badly. So they've got 2 Allen screws here that would let you stop it from paying out. And this does want to auto pay out, much like those other types of unit. Not quite sure why 2 screws on here. I guess you could go either side of one of these supports, so it would only move a little distance. They're finger tightenable, not a problem. This side has a bearing in it. Actually, both sides have bearings in it. So they use ball bearings that are shielded, and then they just spray painted over the bearing on the outside. That's why I couldn't tell easily what it was. You can see in there some of the metal shielded ball bearings. On this side, let's see, on this side, they just painted right over the shielding, which is a little strange, but it will protect the metal from rusting if they're not stainless steel. Again, this connector that can come off if you were to remove this. I'm not sure why you'd want to, and they could have saved a water vulnerable joint here. This actually could be 5 conductor because the outside could be shielded with 4 internal conductors. It's either 4 or 5 anyways. But it seems to me that you're probably not going to be swapping out the fiberglass or the plastic portion of this thing often, so I'm not quite sure why they bothered connectorizing it there rather than just sealing this some watertight seal straight to wires, so you could remove one more location where moisture could damage the joint. That's not ideal. Again, I think this design is better suited to places like conduits and pipelines where it's not really wet and you're keeping away from moisture, even though the end is moisture resistant. Also, the protective cap on this guy, oh, I see. That's why they've got the small screwdriver, because these little plastic inserts aren't to ride on the outside so much as support coverage for the camera on the inside. Got it. And I couldn't figure out the cap, so, you know, if I just read the manual, it'd probably all be a lot more obvious, but you know me, I like to figure it out on my own, which doesn't always work out. Oh, that's interesting. That doesn't cover there. That must be for the connector, which is kind of silly. So they've got screwdriver lets you loosen these nylon grub screws. I think you'd probably want this something like this, where you'd protect the end of this camera from coming in direct contact and getting scratched. I think it's commendable that they provide a screwdriver for it. They probably should have some spares of these nylon screws, if they are nylon. They don't feel like they're pretty tough material at all. They're pretty hard, which makes me think maybe not nylon, or I guess it could be hard nylon. I don't know. I don't think these things are going to last very long, so you might have to look for a substitute. And of course, if they stick out too much, then they could snag on something as you're pushing it through the conduit or pipe, wherever you're going. I looked and I couldn't find any mention of what the resolution of the camera is here. Again, it has 6 LEDs. The set screws here, as I was talking about earlier, stick out proud, which is not great because they could catch on lips between the junction of pipes. If it's like electrical conduit, if it's other kinds of pipe, that's probably less of an issue. But you probably don't want anything sticking out to begin with. They should have made this thicker and had those set screws below the surface. I like the spring end. That'll let it go around objects if you push hard, although it still lets you push past things and allows it to deflect to one side as you're pushing. So that's nice. This guy has a hard power switch on the side as well as a soft switch on the front. That way you don't drain the battery while you've got this in storage, which is kind of nice. So there is a hard off and on, but once you turn that switch on, it doesn't turn on until you hit the soft switch. This is not a very positive feeling mount here. Oh. I don't think the mount's going to last long. You're going to end up using this guy standalone. It's going to break. It feels really flimsy, which is unfortunate. So you can see the picture here. Here's my hand in front of the camera. Pretty nice picture. The image on the screen is fairly dark. They may have ability to make it brighter. Let's see here in the manual. There we are. Brightness. Okay. Oh, it's only 50%. Let's see. Oh, probably wanted contrast, not brightness, but I didn't know it had contrast. So typically in video circles, contrast is your video level. Let's see, I've got that cranked all the way up. Okay. That's kind of blown out, but that is a bit brighter. There's fairly bright lights here because I shoot here, and with everything cranked all the way up, you can see that the viewfinder here is pretty bright. There's some interesting video effects here where we're hitting the level so hot that it's causing weird distortion. They didn't compensate for that, unfortunately. I guess you may adjust it based on situation. So let's see, okay. Let's turn this down again. How about 70? Color, saturation, and sharpness. All right, mode button for back. Good instructions on the screen. That's better. It's a little bit of that fluttering, but still very visible. Probably playback and regular. There's still photos and then playback. So I guess this is record right now. Came with a micro secure digital card. I love when they do that, even if it's not a high quality one. That's nice that they include all that. So the trick is, while you're simply in record mode, just up arrow and you can turn the light intensity up. That's it. Off and on. Pretty straightforward. All right, what do you say we give this guy a test? Here we're taking a look at a practical example of this camera. My brother-in-law has a washer-dryer combo that's stacked, and he couldn't figure out why it wouldn't go all the way back against the wall. And he just ran a new ductwork, and lo and behold, the duct is sandwiched on itself. And he needs to go pick up a 90, and that'll help him push it back another 4 or 5 inches probably. A good practical use. The image is pretty reasonable. You can see the gas line for the dryer right there as well. And there's a little bit of compression artifacting. Well, more than a little bit. There's quite a bit of compression artifacting in the image, but very usable. Wouldn't call it super high res. The camera is always set to macro, so things far away aren't in focus, but close up is reasonably sharp. Here's just a check of where the drain pipe goes into the sewer from the washer. Make sure it's not falling out. Might as well check everything while we're here. Next up is a rain gutter that I hopefully cleared all of the plants out of. Interesting soft focus there. I'm not quite sure why that is. And then things just jump into sharpness. Very interesting. So you're seeing the those jumps are because those little screws possibly, or just the head is catching on the way up. So it doesn't make for very smooth movies if that's what you're trying to do, but the image quality is decent, and you can check and make sure that there's no plants still growing in the gutter, although up there you could see something. I'm currently off work, so I don't have access to all those great conduits we have at work that this kind of tool would be really useful for. But this is pulling the camera back across the ground in my front yard. Just seeing what close-up of the plants would look like. I thought it'd be interesting. All the chunks on the ground are bark. We have tree bark to help keep the moisture in. And there's a little greenery, which is nice because the front of our house, we have all Australian low water plants because I live in Southern California and we're always in a water crisis. Transitioning some other plants. It's hard to be smooth with it because it catches on everything. Of course, they weren't really meant to be pulled backwards either. Depth of field's not great, so focus is not always particularly awesome, but adequate. Odd plant. Transition to some aluminum pipe. You can see the weld seam. I was up in my rafters. That was about as close to having conduit as I had. But the resolution is good enough to see the weld seam. I think you get the point. Here's a look through the spindle of my lathe, coming backwards. See the inside of the jaws and all the debris that really should be cleaned off. I try and keep them clean, but boy, that's not. Let's get weird. Here's pulling the camera through a pile of rags. Next up, I want to see how dirty the inside of my fine vacuum hose is, and sure enough, it is dirty. Interestingly enough, it kind of looks like air's flowing, but the vacuum's off. You're actually just seeing dust bounce off the walls, I think. And you can see how those little set screws sort of catch on the ribs in the vacuum hose, which is something I was worried about, and it's definitely a problem. I can push it, but definitely not ideal. Overall, I think this is pretty decent value for the money, but there's some definite caveats. The mount for the monitor is going to break, not going to last. Cheesy. The protector for the camera lens, don't like how that was designed. They did, and at a minimum, they should have provided extra nylon screws because they're absolutely going to get lost. But on top of that, it's not built very well either. The camera quality is acceptable, and I didn't see any settings to change that. But overall, I think it's a useful tool, and the price is pretty reasonable. Thanks for watching. Hope you find it useful. Hope to see you next time.